really basic. Stop. What didn't work for you? Like, what is just straight up not clicking? It is not resonating. It is not yielding the results you want. Once again, identifying that and ensuring that you're kind of phasing that out or making some sort of change in that.
Thank you so much for joining us on Season 5, Episode 4 of the Make Today Well Live podcast. My name is Almia Mizrahi, one of NormanAid's peer counselors. So please tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
My name is Kate. I am a clinical social work intern at NormanAid and also at El Rodeo. I split my time. I am getting my MSW from UCLA, which is my master's in social work. And it's a really great program because you're able to get clinical hours working in agencies and sites that really appeal to you while also getting your degree. So that's how I'm able to be here this year. And I'm also an alumni of BHUSD. Went through here K through 12 and then on to the University of Michigan. And I had a feeling that I wanted to go into this work. Was really interested in being a therapist and just doing something interpersonal. Always loved working with children, adolescents, and so I figured that getting my master's in social work was kind of the best bet for me that really kind of fit all of my interests into one. So that's how I ended up here, and I'm just so grateful to be at the site this year. I have such amazing support and just such a great community here, and I've just been so thrilled with my experience. I've been here through August, and yeah, just so grateful to be here, so grateful to be on the podcast. It's been such a joy working with you all this year, so it's really fun to be kind of collaborating in this process that we've talked about throughout the year. So thank you for having me.
How do you think students can make realistic and achievable goals for mental health this year?
Yeah, so there's a tool that I really love. It's called Making SMART Goals, and that actually stands for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. And I think when students or really anyone thinks about like creating goals for themselves, they're often like really big, large goals that take a very long time to work towards. And that's great, and that's amazing to have as a North Star, but that can oftentimes overwhelm us versus feeling empowered in achieving them. And so these SMART goals really break it down into things that you feel you can work towards on a daily basis. So like, for example, Amiel, is there something that you're working towards or some sort of goal that you have in mind right now that's been kind of coming up in your life?
Yeah, to not procrastinate and to get my work done like right when it's assigned and not to like leave it till the last minute. I always do that.
Absolutely. So like if you want, we can even just break down that tool so I can kind of show you, for example, thinking about what's specific, like how often do you see yourself procrastinating? What does that look like? Thinking more about the details in terms of measurable, do you measure it in time, in hours, by things on your calendar, attainable, like what do you feel you can really achieve? Because of course, like procrastination is something that happens in day-to-day life and that's very hard to eliminate completely. And then like relevant, how is it going to impact your school or your social life or dance or anything else? And then time-based, like what is the amount of time, what's the kind of frame that you're going to give yourself to work towards that? So that was sort of just breaking down that, for example, which you can apply this to so many different things, whether it's social, emotional, academic, extracurricular related. I just find that to be a really beneficial way to make something a bit more realistic and achievable so that you really do feel empowered and capable and like you're the one behind the steering wheel in terms of accomplishing that.
What can someone do to create a better balance between school, extracurriculars, and personal time?
I think a really big component of that is being able to set boundaries, and that's not always easy and that's not always comfortable, but I find that to be a really beneficial way for my students to kind of piece apart these different aspects of their day-to-day so that they don't bleed into each other. That's often when it becomes really overwhelming, when you feel that you have to choose between like your social life and your friends or your academics or a hobby, whatever that may be. And so I think creating boundaries is hard, but it's necessary work. And the earlier you're able to kind of get comfortable doing that and noticing when you need to do that, the better off you are for when you go to college, for example. and, classes are harder and there's more on your plate and you're making more like big kid decisions. And then that's when the boundary making becomes especially important. And so kind of being able to work on that and flex that muscle now is so crucial. And if you're able to kind of take little steps towards that right now in high school while you have some wiggle room and you have a safety net and you're surrounded by support, I think that just really sets you up long term. But yeah, have either of you had like situations where you've needed to really like create a line in the sand?
I think creating a boundaries between like my schoolwork, dance, and then having my own personal time is kind of hard to like when I have my time to go on my phone and just chill, or like when I want to like choreograph a dance for like my class, or doing all my homework and not procrastinating. It's like the balance of each of those three.
And I think that's such a good example, and being able to like name those separate things and even just identify them, because sometimes I think people aren't even sure what those different components are. It almost just meshes into one, just like this big ambiguous gray matter of like exhaustion and feeling overwhelmed. But yeah, like just the way that you're able to name those different things and acknowledge that they're like different entities that deserve their own like elements of time and effort, I think is so important. But it's definitely hard to get to that place and to get comfortable doing that. But yeah, it's something you work towards, just like any other thing, any other skill. It just takes time, it takes practice, and like, those results I think really come out in longer spurts of time.
What advice do you have for students who struggle to stay consistent with self-care routines?
I have a lot of thoughts on this one, because self-care is like such a buzzword right now. It's such a buzzword. And like, does anyone know what it means? I feel like we've gotten to a point where it's like we all have our own idea. And for some people, it's like face masks. And for some people, it's talk therapy. And for others, it's sports or movement. And like, we all have these our own ideas, which is like really great. And I think like self-care is hard to achieve when you don't know what you're working towards. And so when I think about this, or I'm talking about it with students of mine, my first thought is like, what's fun to you? Like, what feels good? How do you nurture yourself, but it's also fun? It doesn't feel like an obligation. Different things resonate with different people. Some people love journaling. I used to love journaling until one day I started hating it, and I kept doing it because it had worked for me for a long period of time, and it just suddenly wasn't. And I had to learn to adapt and to kind of make my self-care routines out of different pieces and to ditch that. And so I always come back to that question of like, what's fun? Like, what's fun to you? For some people, that's just going on a daily walk with their dog. Or for some people, it's meditating or yoga, or, FaceTiming a friend or family member who didn't get to talk to you that often. So it really does look different for everyone, which I think is something to like celebrate and be excited about. But there's definitely, I think, like this narrative that self-care is like putting on a face mask and like doing the bubble bath thing, and realistically, like that's not what's gonna do it for everyone, and that's completely okay. And so I think it sometimes takes a bit more digging to figure out like really what resonates with you and what feels good to you, what works, and accepting that something that may have worked for you last year or last month might not be the thing that works for you now. And just giving yourself permission to adapt. I think that's really crucial. And obviously in the new year is a perfect time to make those changes and to give yourself permission to adjust and adapt. So I think, I have mixed feelings on New Year's resolutions, but I do think it's a great time to kind of take inventory of what's been working, what's not been working, and what you need to change. And like self-care routines are definitely part of that and something to kind of have top of mind right now.
Hi, my name's Charlotte George. I'm another one of our peer counselors here. Thank you so much for joining us. My first question is, how can students practice mindfulness or manage stress during high pressure situations like finals and college applications?
One of them is, it's an acronym, it's RAIN, and that stands, I'm really big on acronyms today, but that stands for recognize, allow, investigate, and nurture. And it's just like a quick little, like almost like mini intervention to just kind of exercise in the moment when you feel yourself feeling like dysregulated or distracted, just not like yourself. And so the recognize is to kind of acknowledge what's going on, like identify that, tap into it, just like first of all, just name it. Like, what am I feeling? How did this happen? And then the allow is just like validating however you're feeling or whatever you're thinking in the moment, and just giving yourself space to like exist in that and not just push it out immediately. The investigate is like doing that digging. So kind of figuring out like what triggered this. When do I feel this way? Like, what exactly am I feeling right now? What could this be connected to? Doing a bit more of that investigation, and searching. And then nurturing is something that, if either of you have been in like a NormanAid session, it's probably going to be quite a bit of nurturing, is coming back to the things that like make you feel good, and how can you create like a meaningful change from this moment going forward. Like, what do you need to do to bring yourself back to baseline? What kind of messaging, what kind of narratives do you need in that moment? And coming back to that sense of like stillness and calmness, which is sometimes really hard to achieve, but just like the best you can. And the thing that I love about RAIN is that like you don't need to be with a therapist to do it. And it's just like a quick little mindfulness tool for when you're feeling out of sorts, upset, stressed out, dysregulated, whatever that might be. And I find that it works for a lot of students just because it's pretty accessible. And so when you're feeling not so good, you don't have to think to yourself like, oh God, what do I do now? And instead, like, you're just like, okay, RAIN. And then you can kind of break it down and do it yourself. For example, like, is there anything like as a high school student that you feel you or friends or just generally people experience kind of maybe in a day-to-day situation, like an upsetting situation that you feel can like happen during class that gets people out of their baseline zone?
I think getting tests back and getting quizzes back can definitely be a jarring moment, especially because there's not really any build up to it. You can think you did well on a test, you can think you did poorly on a test, and all of a sudden it's just given to you, and then you move on and you continue with class. And so if you don't get the result that you're looking for, you can definitely feel disappointed, and I think it's really hard to not internalize a bad grade as a reflection of yourself. So I think using RAIN for moments like that would be super helpful.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you mentioned that, because obviously a lot of what I do here, being sort of a school-based therapist, is like piecing apart a lot of academic stress, because, people's academic performance is so tied to their mental well-being and even perception of self, and really attached to identity. And I can say firsthand, like, I experienced that when I was in high school. It's obviously an academically demanding school, an academically demanding time. And so I think that students place a lot of weight on moments like that when they're getting that test or quiz back, and it's very easy and very like natural to want to assign yourself to that number. And I'm really glad that you brought up that point of like, there's this feeling that like you just need to move on with your day. But realistically, like, you're probably, you could be very jarred and very upset and confused. And it's hard to just go on with your day and get out your notebook and take notes and then go hang out with your friends if you're feeling upset or you're feeling overwhelmed or disappointed. And kind of like you said, it can also, like, that in itself is a situation that could bleed into your interactions with friends. And so I think that tools like RAIN are very helpful to make sure that you are acknowledging it and taking care of it and doing what you need to do in the moment, so that you can continue on with your day from a bit more of a place of calmness or reassurance, and not carrying that weight with you all around to the next class and the next class and then lunch and then sports or whatever, and bring it home with you. It's like the build up a lot of those events that sometimes that's what it takes for us to notice, when in reality it might be more of like one of those like micro instances that triggers it, and you can kind of take action in the moment. So that's something that I really enjoy using. Also, something that I really encourage is breathing exercises. And I know that's not for everyone, and that's completely okay, but I think it does work for some people. And that's also something that just getting in the habit of like taking a few deep breaths when you're feeling really anxious or really overwhelmed, like, that's our way of telling ourselves to just calm down and take a beat. And no, it's not going to change the world and life is going to go on, but we may just feel just slightly better if we can do that. So sometimes I'll go through like box breaths or just a mini meditation, just really, less than 2 minutes can make a big difference. And that's kind of just over time training your nervous system. So it's small things like that. I guess what I'm getting at right now is that big change can come from a lot of small changes in the moment. Things really add up in both ways. Making a lot of like positive changes, like these really micro instances of making positive changes, could lead to great big change over time, and letting these negative instances really impact you and not acknowledge them and take care of them can also lead to like big negative change over time. So I think just realizing that the power that like you have and the tools that you have in the moment can create lasting change. It's powerful to know just how capable you are of doing these things by yourself. And of course it's great to like come to NormanAid and to talk to a therapist. And I really encourage that for anyone who's interested or feels they may benefit. Like, I'm so amazed by this program. And I also think that like you as a person have so much within you and so much that you can exercise throughout the day that you don't even know yet. So it's like really those two things in tandem with each other, I think, leads to just overall more mindfulness, feeling more present, more engaged, and overall just happier in school on a day-to-day basis.
I really liked how you mentioned just taking a couple minutes to do deep breathing inside yourself and in between those moments of stress, especially during school, and not letting them bottle up. I think that taking care of them in the moment can make it a lot less overwhelming versus letting things accumulate over the day and then having to deal with it all when you get home. So taking those few minutes after a test, after a quiz, after a class, take some deep breaths. And even if you need, the NormanAid mindfulness space is always available for 15 minutes. You can come in with teacher permission to just take a minute and take a breath if you need to.
You touched on that part of like not even knowing you feel a certain way until you say it out loud, or you give yourself the moment to feel it out, which is really like at the very foundation, the very base of like everything I'm saying, you know, giving yourself space to feel so that you know what you're feeling and you could acknowledge that. And you know, not everything is going to change after you take a couple deep breaths, but just getting that initial piece of like, how am I feeling? Okay, and now I'm going to feel it, is already like taking so many steps in the right direction and can kind of minimize the negative impact these little things can have throughout the day. So I'm really, really happy that you mentioned that, because just such an important and crucial point.
For some students that are struggling with motivation, what are some small steps that they can take to stay on track?
So I'm going to plug another tool, which is Stop, Start, Continue. This one I'm newer to, was introduced to kind of going into the new year, but like really basic. Stop. What didn't work for you? Like, what is just straight up not clicking? It is not resonating. It is not yielding the results you want. Once again, identifying that and ensuring that you're kind of phasing that out or making some sort of change in that, because if it wasn't serving you in 2024 or last semester, it's likely not going to serve you in the new semester in 2025. So just being able to kind of name that. And then start. What is something that you haven't done yet? Like, what's been eating away at you? What's been top of mind? Maybe it's a hobby or someone you want to be friends with, or a new like study skill. It could be all across the board. Again, social, emotional, family-based, academic, extracurricular, like always being broad with these is so critical because they're all so connected. But so thinking about things that you want to start, and it doesn't need to be just limited to school. Not everything is about grades. And again, when we make changes in, for example, who we're surrounding ourselves with, or our self-care, or our physical activity, oftentimes you'll see changes in grades. So keeping that in mind, what do you need to start? What do you need to initiate? What's the thing that's been eating at you that you want to just like, you want to do it, you want to commit to it? And then continue. Really basic. What was working for you? What were the things that were clicking? Where did you get those good results? And how can you continue to integrate that into your life now? And just making sure that you're continuing to do those things, because right, when something works, when you're finding success in something, always important to find ways to stick to it. You know, once you find something that clicks, it's the best. It's so great to know what works for you and just allowing yourself to stay on that path. So I think that's really helpful for people who may be feeling overwhelmed or unmotivated. Just taking quick inventory. It's just like taking an audit of what's going on, what worked, what didn't work, and what do you want to start. And then incorporating that into the new year. So I think like all these little acronyms and all these little tools, I think take like really big, complicated ideas and kind of make them bite-sized, make them something that you can just like digest right now and really conceptualize and wrap your mind around. Because I think like some of that lack of motivation or exhaustion or a lack of willingness to change, just it comes from like a place of like a bit like fatigue or confusion, just all of this stuff seems really complicated and I don't want to deal with it. But once you're able to break it down into like a few little chunks, it seems a lot more approachable and a lot more accessible. And I think that's huge. So that's what I would recommend for people who just like are feeling a bit sluggish or unmotivated to make these changes. Just breaking it down a bit.
Yeah, I mean, that really reminded me of, the saying that nothing changes if nothing changes, and really taking those steps. And I really like how with the acronyms, it kind of gives you like a step-by-step checklist, 1, 2, 3, 4, of what to do. They're in order. You don't have to think about it as much, and you can use that as kind of a recipe to make yourself feel better.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that sometimes more like regimented approaches work for people. Just being able to have things that you can like make into bullet points or put on a list. Mental health is obviously like, it's all of these different things. It's very ambiguous. It's hard for some people to understand how to approach mental health and mental well-being. And, a lot of it is very abstract and piecing apart things with like a therapist or whoever else and navigating complicated situations. It's not always so regimented. You can't always put it into lists, but there are these little ways, whether it's an acronym or whether it's stop, start, continue, whatever it is, making it more digestible in that sense. I think that just makes it like a lot easier for people to understand and a lot less overwhelming to approach. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
I love what you said, especially with the acronyms. I kind of think in my personal experience, I've combined kind of the acronyms and journaling together, kind of just thinking through the acronyms in my brain isn't always enough to feel kind of concrete enough to build something off of. So I will write it in a journal and kind of use the acronyms as a journal prompt. So list for each specific letter and identify each one, what correlates with each letter. And I find that to be super helpful with these skills, kind of making it a little more tangible and then taking it out of your brain and putting it onto a piece of paper. How do you think students can stay motivated and accountable for their goals throughout the year?
I think a large part of that is being excited about it. And of course, like not everything you're doing every day is going to be up to you or is going to be like super fun. Like I totally get that. I've been there. But I think trying to make things fun for you and to be excited about them wherever you can, and not losing hope. And I think that part of that is also being open to change. And maybe you don't love something right now, but maybe trying on a different perspective could be the change you need. So just allowing yourself to change, allowing yourself to be open to new narratives and new outcomes. I feel like I know so many people throughout high school who adopted like so many different like hobbies and sports and potential career paths. Like it's such an exciting time of change if you let it be. So just like surprise yourself, keep an open mind. And part of that too is allowing yourself to pivot. Pivoting is so important. It always is. It's not just high school, but like forever. Being able to just adjust and adapt, I think is really critical to sustaining change. So for example, if you set some sort of goal or have like a North Star that you realize like isn't actually what you want to work towards or what you need to work towards, that's completely fine. Like allow yourself to scrap it and start over. Being malleable is really, really important. And I think that sometimes people have these visions that are so set in stone, and then when they're not exactly achieving it, it like derails everything else and then makes everything else you've worked towards like not valid, which obviously isn't the case. So just making sure that you're like keeping an open mind, creating change where there needs to be change so that you can continue to feel good, motivated, accomplished. That's just, I think, a very important piece of it too, as much as setting the goals, but also being able to change the goals when you need to.
I think that's such a good reminder too. I mean, change can be terrifying, and it's really easy to just as a default be against change, but welcoming it and realizing that even in the moment, if you think the change is negative, you could be grateful for it in the future, and you don't know how things are going to play out until they do. I think another piece that you brought up that really resonated with me with self-trust is how hard it can be to really trust yourself. And I think just as important as it is to set new goals, it is really just as important to acknowledge the goals that you have accomplished and kind of use the goals that you have accomplished as motivation that you can achieve your goals, and that at one point you might have thought you never would have been at the place that you were today, and here you are. And so acknowledge that and use that kind of as your fuel of, I can do hard things, and while it might not seem like it's going to work out now, I've been in this position before, even if it's different circumstances, and it's worked out. So I think those reminders can really help build self-trust, which seems like a super complicated thing to grasp. And especially I think in like these teenage years, it's super hard to trust yourself, and we're all learning how to do it. And so using your accomplishments and really acknowledging your wins and celebrating them.
Like Charlotte, for you as a senior, and Amiel, for you as a sophomore, like thinking about the last few years and what you've been able to do and like how you got to where you are today. Like I look at you both, and like literally just before this podcast, we were talking about things coming up, and like Charlotte, you just told me you committed to college, but I didn't even know about. And Amiel, like you are now doing your dance company performances, and I remember when you were choreographing the dance, and we were talking all about that, and like look where you are now, you know, like it's all of these things that may seem just like, oh, whatever, did that. These are big things. And I know that at one point in time, what you've achieved now, you were looking at and thinking like, oh gosh, like how am I going to get there? And now you're there, and you're both doing like really big, amazing things that took a lot of hard work and hard effort. And so being able to just appreciate how far you've come, the things that you've already done, I think gives a lot of confidence back into ourselves, even though we may dismiss it. Like these are big things that you should be bringing to the surface and really celebrating. Like that's huge. So I'm really happy that you brought that up.
I just want to say thank you so much for everything that you shared. I know that everyone listening to this is going to take something out of it. I know I took something out of what you said, and I just want to say thank you for giving us some insight and guidance, and it was amazing to have you, so thank you.
So appreciate it, and I'm so happy to have been on this podcast. It's seriously been just such an amazing experience working here and with you all, and you guys are doing such important work and having really important conversations and hard conversations, and I just hope you know that you're making such a big impact, not just in peer counseling, not just in this school, but like far beyond the walls of Beverly Hills High School. You're both, and all of you guys are doing like just such important work. So keep on keeping on and sticking to what you love and what's working. And this is just a great conversation. I feel like I was reminded of so many things that I need, that, you know, you got to practice what you preach, right? So thank you again for having me on. This was so much fun, and it's just been such a great experience working with both of you throughout the year.
We would like to thank our generous sponsors and partners, Michael J. LeBeau, NormanAid Peer Counselors, KBEV, and of course, we'd like to thank our listeners. Stay safe and make today well lived.